Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June 17th, 2019. Time for another show. 2 weeks, 2 months, maybe. Very soon. Fairly soon. We'll just do it on the Donald Trump standard. I don't know if you noticed, but the president is dumb as a rock, and it's really difficult to tell your kids to stay in school when he's like that. Plenty to catch up on, of course, over the weekend. No real, actual news like there used to be in the olden days where policies were announced and things happened. But I guess that's a good thing during the Trump administration. After all, the thing we all expected to be announced over the weekend was perhaps declaration. Well, you'll never get a declaration of war anymore, but war with Iran. But that didn't happen, so that's good. Thankfully, scheduling is in the president's hands, and you know how he is. This morning he's threatening another thing happening fairly soon, very soon. We'll see what happens. This time, again, a healthcare plan. Can you believe it? I don't know what's going on over at ABC News. And I haven't watched the development of the story closely, but I guess ABC News, and I guess very wisely, has decided to drag out the release of did he do a series of interviews? Was this all one day? I can't even really figure out exactly what it is that's going on here. But I guess you know about the George Stephanopoulos interviews, and we knew about them last week, and I guess they're just releasing it in tranches. Is that what's happening, or else it was so dense with idiocy that it took this long to parse the thing. But day after day after day, there's just a new nugget every 5 minutes in each day. I guess it's just chock full of stupidity. And people are discovering new, dumber than usual things having been said during various phases of this interview. And it looks like it took them an awful long time to do. There's different settings. You know how Trump is. I wonder whether it was his idea to do the interview and move it in different settings, and I don't know whether is that him trying to direct his own reality TV show? Is that him trying to break up the interview and the flow of the conversation so that nobody notices how dumb he is all at once? I'm not really sure. Not positive of how it's being run, but every time a new clip comes out, there's a new outrage at how completely idiotic the president is, and I don't know, so I guess I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that George Stephanopoulos elicited that. He's one of the few interviewers who has been willing to push back even a little bit on Trump when he makes ridiculous claims, and it results in another outrage moment where Trump yells at him, essentially. And I think last weekend, just going into the weekend on Friday, the new nugget was Trump telling him that because he was pressing him for an actual answer to his question about why didn't you, I think the setup of the question is, why are you answering these questions with me now and you wouldn't answer them under oath with Robert Mueller? And then some argument about whether or not he had done that, which he didn't, but relying on, I answered some questions, some written questions. And I answered them, but they weren't about the or I guess, was it on the obstruction portion of the case that he didn't answer questions, and so Stephanopoulos is pressing him on that. And you know what? You're being, what did he say to him? I can't even remember now, but he says, you're being basically you're being a jerk. You're being a little weasel, whatever it was that he told him. We'll check in with Greg Dworkin and probably get the actual wording of it. The transcripts are out. But he, says, was it you're being a little, dang, I can't even remember what it was, but which is usual for you. It was nuts. Anyway, all the transcripts are out. People are putting out the raw transcripts, which is the usual upshot also of these sorts of extended interviews where the reporters can't quite get across how ridiculous the president really is and how ridiculous he sounds. So they put those out. Yes, thanks, Greg. A little wise guy. That was it. Yeah. So the transcripts are out, and I've got them somewhere, and I was pondering this morning whether they are given better effect by being read in a terrible Trump imitation voice, or whether they're just better to read straight out, but with all the pauses and flip-flops and I guess I would say mental gymnastics if I thought he was up to it, but whatever it is. The gears turning in his head, if there are any, if they're not rusted. It's sometimes insightful to see these things and to see this stuff happening. But there's a million of them. And, well, I don't know. Here's one, I guess, that stems from this having been Father's Day weekend. And I hope you all had a wonderful Father's Day, et cetera, et cetera. I'm being very teary-eyed about that. I see Peter Segal, I guess, commenting, Totes Norm's way to talk about your son. Did Stephanopoulos ask him about where's Barron? Because it was, like we said, it was Father's Day yesterday. No photos of, this is interesting. There's no photos of Trump with his kids on Father's Day, because what does Trump care? He goes golfing instead with Lindsey Graham. And he's notorious for golfing instead of doing any of the things he's supposed to do as president or as a human being, father, husband, what have you. That's just the way he is. We've come to accept that. But I guess Peter Segal grabbed by this quote, Trump saying, what a normal way of talking about your son. Barron's doing fantastically. He's here. He likes soccer. He's doing a great job. That's sort of not super normal or anything like it, but you'd think maybe a photo with his son would be a good idea. And okay, some people are either reluctant to use their children that way, or just have a relatively distant relationship from their children. All sorts of reasons why you might not have a photo op with your kids on Father's Day if you're the president of the United States. But yeah, and certainly respecting Barron's privacy. But what about the other kids? I mean, he is their father. He's famously the father of a guy who actually has the same name as him. And they are photographed together all over the place. They just went to England. They weren't supposed to go to England. They weren't supposed to be there. They weren't supposed to be in all the photos, but they made sure the kids were in every one of those damn photos. And now it's Father's Day, and you can't get a shot of the two of them together. Not really sure what that's supposed to mean. Anyway, lots to look at, lots to catch up with. Greg's sharing, I guess, his favorite snippets of it as well. I'm trying to think what else I put together here. Daniel Dale, of course, put together what he says is a non-exhaustive list of the false claims Trump made in his ABC interview, and I don't know whether it's one long continuous interview, one long continuous list of fact-free claims that he makes, or whether it's split up into different segments. And I'm just not sure what's the most astonishing of all these various pieces. It still strikes me that as amazing that interviewers don't. I don't see how you could not burst out laughing sitting across from the guy and looking at the little sausages he has, as somebody said, sewn into the to his lower eyelids. His baggy eyes, this stupid pink chameleon eyes, reverse raccoon spray tan thing going on. It's just bizarre, and I guess we're supposed to just get past that. You're not supposed to focus on looks, but I don't see how you could interview the guy without laughing. And then he says things, so I don't see how you could stop yourself. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here. You got highlights from this and many other things, I'm sure.
Lowlights.
Lowlights, yeah. Oh,
I mean, there are
that's
no
what's going on in his hair. Yes.
You know, was this the interview that he kicked out Mick Mulvaney because Mulvaney coughed?
Yes. Well, it's certainly part of it. I don't understand how they built this thing. It's filmed in 5 different locations. Yeah. But yes, that it's Trump and Stephanopoulos.
I wish John Kelly was there, snorting in derision. I mean, and then Trump said, "Leave the room," and Kelly said, "I'm not leaving the room."
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion of this too. So Mick Mulvaney coughs, and then somebody says, "Oh, I got an email from a former White House staffer who says that we were always instructed not to cough or sneeze around him because he's a germaphobe and he views coughing or sneezing as a sign of weakness and possible, maybe you're ill,
impossible
whatever."
Plague.
Yeah, I guess so. So there's the germophobia angle, but then there's also the angle that really got me was, this was the clip circulated yesterday. He's answering one of Stephanopoulos' questions. This one set in the Oval Office at the Resolute desk. And was Mulvaney like maybe clearing his throat or just, whatever. He coughs. Aside from the germophobia, he says, he's like, cut. He's directing his reality TV show. Cut. Let's do that over again. Ask me that question again. I'll answer it again. Because he thought he was giving a pure genius answer. And now there's a cough in the background while he's giving it. So it's now less than perfect as a take.
Yeah, but that's part of it. The germophobia thing is part of it. But also part of it is the stagecraft of wanting the public to think that he's sitting, for example, in the Oval Office desk chair there, and that he and Stephanopoulos are one-on-one and there's nobody else around.
Oh, yeah.
And his aides aren't there listening and coaching and holding up, oak tag, that says with crayon on it, no, or don't say that,
right.
It's all his genius, and he could just spontaneously do all of this. So if you cough, you spoil the mood, you spoil the picture, you spoil the optics, for those who hate that word.
That's true, too.
And you also cough on him, and maybe you give him the plague, and you're also taking attention away from him to the person who's actually coughing. So all of those things are bad. And he reacted badly to it. But, of course, it was probably to his benefit because his answers were so stupid that, anything that would distract from that was okay. But the worst thing, the absolute worst thing, of course, was out last week. Your campaign this time around, if foreigners, if Russia, if China, if someone else offers you information on opponents, should they accept it or should they call the FBI? That's Stephanopoulos from the transcript. And Trump says, I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, we have information on your opponent. Oh, I think I'd want to hear it.
Yeah.
Embarrassing the Norwegians, of course. But we could ask Buttigieg. He speaks Norwegian. Maybe he could translate what Trump actually was trying to say.
I could listen to it without danger because I don't understand Norwegian.
Yeah. So, it was awful. It was an awful interview. But that's only part and parcel of what happened this weekend. Of course, he had to backtrack, and actually even he realizes he made some pretty big blunders there because there's been a lot of, you have to appreciate what he meant and what he thinks rather than what he said. You can never go by what he says. Well, we know that because he's a liar. But what they meant is don't ever hold us accountable for things we actually say. You have to hold us accountable for things that we think you should think that we mean.
Yeah, and then maybe not even that.
Well,
because if we screwed that up,
we can change that to fit whatever it is we think is appropriate at the time. But he's got that story circulating, and there's a whole raft of polling that came out over the weekend, plus more information on the leaked polling from his internal stuff, which is bizarre, which is worth talking about too. But let's go through some of that polling because I think it's illustrative. There's two buckets of polling to talk about. There's the Democratic primary polling. And there's the head-to-head polling with Trump.
Head-to-head,
and let's do some of that. In South Carolina for the Democratic primary, Joe Biden 37, Elizabeth Warren 17, Pete Buttigieg 11, Kamala Harris 9, Bernie Sanders 9. Harris and Sanders are not doing well in that poll. And the change from last month, Biden's down 9, Warren's up 9, part of her surge. Buttigieg is up 3, Harris is -1, Sanders is -6. Everybody else is doing pretty poorly. So South Carolina is a key state, and about 60% of the Democratic primary there are going to be people of color. And so Biden's lost a little bit, but still leads in a big way. And that's basically the story of the Democratic primary polling. This is CBS, who put out their battleground poll, early contest likely Democratic voters, considering supporting, rather than who do you support. Are you considering supporting Biden's 55, Warren 49, Harris 45, Sanders 43, and Pete Buttigieg 32, which I think gives you a pretty good feel for where things are. That is to say, Biden still leads, and in some cases he leads by a lot. He's leading in the early states. For those who thought he was just going to collapse on his own because he either said something stupid or did something stupid, recently or in the past, whatever, hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
But he's no lock.
There'll be
He's
more.
not going to just fade away on his own. He's not just going to burst. That hasn't happened and probably won't happen. On the other hand, the debates are coming up in less than 2 weeks, and things will change after that.
Okay, well, they're supposed to.
Extremely important a candidate convinces you, says the CBS Battleground poll. These are the early contests. The Iowas and New Hampshires and South Carolinas and Nevadas of the world. It's extremely important a candidate convinces you they, and here are the questions.
Oh, okay. Oh, right, yes.
Can defeat Trump, 78%.
Okay.
Have new policy ideas, 40%. Would change Washington, 31%. Nobody expects
I don't know.
a president to change Washington. Don't come in here saying we're going to change things, we're going to drain the swamp.
Oh.
That's not going to happen, and everybody knows you're lying. Okay,
People
forget
love
that.
to say it. Okay.
The question is, are you voting for policy? And only 40% of Democrats are. That is not surprising. Every single poll that asks the question, are you looking for leadership or are you looking for policy?
Oh.
They'll say leadership.
Oh, yeah. Well, right, I guess so. And no surprise to the country that elects the most beer-worthy president.
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're smart, you can get good policy. You can hire people who do policy.
Oh, that's the problem.
Well, you could. I mean, you don't have to have Elizabeth Warren's policies. You can steal Elizabeth Warren's policies.
That is true, too. I was wondering what was happening with the current president. So you lost me at if you're smart.
Well, it's so I don't think that policy thing is the driving force. Policy's never been the driving force. It's politics.
Yeah, well, right. Or
would you rather have
whether
somebody
you
who
want to have a
looks
beer
good and
with
has
somebody.
presidential hair, or somebody who looks really,
That's out
really,
the window.
really terrible, looks like a little gnome, and or maybe looks like Yoda, but has great policies?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's what drives Trump and his central casting thinking in a certain way. Although
Not necessarily wrong, because people do vote that way.
Yeah,
but the important thing is,
I mean, not for
this electability
secretaries.
thing that everybody makes fun of is real, and in fact, that's what the voters consider.
I mean,
And,
it's
and
dumb, but
reporters
it's there.
keep telling each other, that's not how you should do things. You should vote for it. But that's, voters want somebody who can beat Trump.
Yeah, well, that's true, and they probably think a lot of people can, and that's good. It's true. I mean, there's never been an overwhelming interest in nitty gritty of policy, and when
But,
you have it, you're too
it's
prepared.
True. That's what I mean about policy being way down there. And besides, I would invoke the Potter-Stewart rule.
Okay.
I don't know what electability is, but I know it when I see it.
Oh, okay. That's the one. All right. Yeah, I guess that's never been true. No one can describe that. And I don't know. It's just an amazing thing where that's gotten us. And then the idea of presidential hair. And the idea that Donald Trump thought he had that.
Yeah, Chris Dodd had presidential hair. I still can't believe he didn't do better in 2008. But
Must be then
be that as
no
it may, it's probably
substance to
those
the
green
hair
ties he used to wear. Democrats' message
problem.
should be in the CBS
Gotta be
YouGov.
red.
This is a YouGov poll, by the way, Battleground Tracker 2020. So, do you want the Democrats to be more progressive than Obama administration,
Oh,
or do you want Democrats to return the country to before Trump? How do you think Democrats feel about that?
Democrats more progressive than Obama or return to before Trump? I guess before Trump.
Well, that's 47, and more progressive is 53. I guess
well,
my
that's
point
nice.
is that it's just about
don't-
tied.
Oh, okay. So there was no right answer for me.
There is
Well,
no
yes,
right
there is.
answer.
Well, there
and,
is. I gave
and
the
you know,
wrong
for
one.
everybody looking, you see,
The
I don't
number is
understand how
lower.
people can like Joe Biden. Half of the Democratic Party
Yes.
is moderate conservative. Half of the Democratic Party wants to return the country to before Trump.
Yes.
The other half wants us to move on and be better and go for the future.
Well, that's
That's
nice.
only half the
We're
party.
not supposed to look backward.
You need a bridge to the 21st century, except we're already in the 21st century and the bridges are falling apart. But the point is
Yes.
that it's not an automatic 85% say we have to move forward. That's not the mood of the country right now. It's not the mood of Democrats.
Well, it's a weird time. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I thought I was guessing at what everybody else was going to say. I'm surprised that the majority actually said, "Yeah, I just want more
Slightly.
progressive." Oh,
Slight majority.
good.
Okay,
I
so
thought
the
you were going to say
Democratic
the other
Party
thing.
is slightly progressive, right?
Okay,
and if
well,
you
that's
think of
nice.
the Democratic Party as being slightly progressive, where all these candidates are in the polls makes a lot more sense.
Yes. Also, you should read that Abigail Spanberger. I know she's coming up somewhere.
She is, of course. So anyway, there's that. Let's see, what else does the CBS News Battleground poll say? This is directly from the poll. Democrats have different thoughts on what electability entails, on what swing voters will want, and there's some division over what the party's message ought to be.
Yeah.
They're split on whether the party's message should emphasize returning the country to how it was before Trump, and that's Biden's appeal, or whether they should argue for an even more progressive agenda than they had under Obama. This something known versus something new, something borrowed, something blue, dynamic helps explain some of the candidate preferences across key states, and it does. And so, you have to take that into account. And that's why Biden isn't going to self-destruct. You got to destruct him if you want to beat him.
I guess so. Yeah. I guess he represents the go back to.
He does. He absolutely does. He represents the over 50 vote. He represents the moderate conservative. He represents half the party.
I should just tell him, I appreciate your position, but we can't look backwards, Joe. We have to move forward.
That's what the rearview mirror is for.
That was your idea.
But if you think of it this way, if Biden has that, and he's got 50%, and the rest are splitting the other 50%, right. That's what it looks like in the rankings right now.
Although they're not all more progressive necessarily.
No, but take the top 3 or 4.
Well, they're definitely not.
Take the top 5.
Okay.
Get rid of everybody else.
All right.
You have Warren, Harris, Sanders, right? And Buttigieg is hard to fit. He kind of straddles both. But if Warren, Harris, and Sanders split the 53, and Biden gets the lion's share of the 47, he's going to be ahead in the high 30s, low 40s, which is where he is.
Oh, well, that makes some sense. Must be why it's happening.
Well, again, will that dynamic change? Is it fixed? Of course not. We'll have to see what happens. And other things could happen as well. So now Fox comes out with their own poll over the weekend. And I think that's of merit because whatever they say, Fox News watchers will hear it. I don't know that they report at any of the other polls. We'll have a fun thing to say after the break about Rasmussen and Nate Silver. But right now, new Fox News 2020 poll. Biden 32, Sanders 13, Warren 9. Here's a poll where Sanders is still in second and Warren hasn't overtaken him yet. Buttigieg 8, Harris 8. Again, those are the top 5. I think everybody else is going to pack it in. I think it's going to be, the Dom is going to be one of those top 5, I think.
Okay.
O'Rourke 4, Booker 3, Klobuchar 2, Yang 2, Castro 1, Delaney 1, Gabbard 1, Gillibrand 1, Ryan 1. Everybody else has less than 1. Bennett, Bullock, de Blasio, Hickenlooper, Inslee, Moulton, Swalwell, Williamson has 0. So that's where the Democratic primary stands. Fox also did head-to-head polling, and this is what Fox News viewers will hear. Biden 49, Trump 39. Sanders 49, Trump 40. Harris 42, Trump 41. Warren 43, Trump 41. Buttigieg 41, Trump 40. Basically, Trump, the known candidate, can't crack 41 in this poll, and he couldn't crack 42 in, I can't even remember which poll it was. There have been so many recently. But with the head-to-heads, the Democrats are winning all of these things. And that's why when Trump's internal re-election campaign poll leaked, they were shocking but not surprising.
Yeah.
Listen to these numbers.
They're all fired. Yes.
Pennsylvania, Biden leads Trump by 16.
That is Wisconsin,
a small amount. Biden leads Trump by 10.
Yeah.
Right. Florida, Biden leads Trump by 7. Texas, Trump leads Biden by 2. And by the way, there's a new Texas poll out from Texas Tribune, University of Texas. Very good poll.
Oh.
And 50-50, except they're comparing Trump to a generic Democrat. Would you vote to reelect Trump? 50% say yes, 50% say no.
Oh, okay. How does he do against the alligator with a knife in his head?
Well, there's a metaphor.
I guess so.
Especially for an alligator. Okay, more numbers from those internal polls. Virginia, Biden leads Trump by 17. Maine, Biden leads Trump by 15. Minnesota, Biden leads Trump by 14. North Carolina, Biden leads Trump by 8. Iowa, Biden leads Trump by 7. Georgia, Biden beats Trump by 6. Ohio, Biden leads Trump by 1.
So record-breaking landslide for Trump is what you're saying.
Apparently. And so, of course, what did Trump do?
That's what he said.
It's all fake news, and besides, all my
Right.
pollsters are fired.
Yeah, that's right. I like that part, too. It's fake, so don't pay any attention to it. But you're all
Actually,
fired
he kept
for it
Fabrizio,
anyway.
Tony Fabrizio, who's his main pollster and an
They're all
absolute
fired.
professional, and he fired Kellyanne Conway's company.
Oh,
Remember, she's a pollster.
but not her.
Not her.
She's still there. Right, but she's not
No,
there
it
as
was
a pollster.
recommended that they get rid
That's
of her
funny.
because she's violating the Hatch Act.
Yes, right, but not as a pollster. She's not.
That's why Trump is really not winning the next election, as far as
Amazing.
if it were held today.
I did not realize that they were firing Kellyanne Conway's. I didn't realize they were still paying Kellyanne Conway's company, but I guess I should have guessed it. She's
You should have guessed that.
double dipping or not? What do you think?
Yeah,
Yes.
something. So Charles Franklin points out, there's been a lot of recent talk about record turnout in 2020. In fact, Ron Brownstein had a piece on that over the weekend that I had in the Saturday Pundit Roundup that was just, record turnouts expected. And Franklin says, Charles Franklin, you may remember, is a pollster himself. He's an academic. He runs the MU Law Poll in Wisconsin, Marquette University, and it's excellent. He's very good. He's one of the best pollsters in the country. There's been a lot of recent talk about record turnout in 2020. Here's one bit of that evidence. Interest in the upcoming election over the last 2 cycles plus this year. Okay? Compare the late surge in 2012 and the late surge in 2016, where interest climbed
Yes.
to about 53, 54%.
All right.
Only half the country was
Skyrocketing.
interested. That's the
Yeah.
late surge.
Right.
We're starting at 56, 57% now.
All right. Well, all right. So I guess if there is a surge, we'll.
We'll go even higher, but
Yeah.
people are interested. They're
I
following.
guess so. I hope so. It's about time. So I guess what else could drive it is people are ready to get rid of this idiot president. But, all right. Well, good. I'm glad we're starting at surge levels. So the surge can only take us higher. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Oh boy! Well, I'm still amazed at these things, and taking these breaks, I get a chance to look through the transcripts that are being released, and it's just amazing. That
Outstanding or outrageous? Which word
it's
would you use?
outrageous.
It's standrageous.
Strand-mazing. I don't know what to say about it. It's just okay, but we're not on that. We're still polling, or still talking about the polling
numbers are
and
fun, right?
the upcoming debates, et cetera, and how those are going to shake out. There's too many people involved for me to know, but they did do their draw, like the World Cup going on at the same time. They're drawing groups for the debates, and I have seen people debating the breakdown of the groups, and
Either Elizabeth Warren is going to give a post-grad seminar in her first one, and Biden and Bernie are going to attack each other in the second one, or the first one's going to be boring, and the second one is the marquee matchup because it's got 4 out of the 5 top ones. And the fact of the matter is, nobody really knows how it's going to turn out.
But everyone it was fun watching.
It's either great for Elizabeth Warren or terrible for Elizabeth Warren, or I don't know, for Elizabeth Warren.
And the other side of the ledger, this is either fantastic for Bernie Sanders or a setup by the man to take Bernie Sanders down. I'm not sure which one we're going to land on for that one.
Right. Well, I think over the weekend in the Pundit Roundup, and if it wasn't that, it was when I did Thursday, sitting in for Meteor Blades. But Sanders is not doing well, and his numbers are not doing well. And that South Carolina stuff that I read to you about how he Harris in particular had dropped, whereas Biden still is in a commanding lead there, despite the fact that he's dropped as well, is part of the issue. And there are many people who are saying that. In fact, Ryan Grimm, of all people, who can hardly be accused. Was it Ryan Grimm? No, it was Ryan Grimm. If you're on the left, it's really not about whether it's Sanders or Warren. It's whether one of them wins. Last best chance the left has was maybe 76, and they went to war, and the conservative guy snuck through. That might mean it's Sanders, and there's every reason to believe he can then beat Trump. But Warren is not the thing stopping that from happening. If they both merely fight each other for a segment of the electorate, then they'll both lose. Basically, what he's saying is that there's not enough room for both of them. And if it turns out to be Warren, the Sanders people shouldn't be attacking her. And, of course, that's what's happening. Everybody attacked Grimm.
Oh, well. Sure.
You know, and part of it is that when you look at people's preferences, people who are considering Biden are also considering Warren and also considering Sanders and also considering Kamala Harris. And people who are for Sanders are basically not considering anybody else.
Oh, okay.
And that shows up in polling. It shows up in attitude. It shows up in everything. And that's why the flashbacks of 2016 give people pause.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well,
right? And so it may be an unpopular thing to say, but here's what's going to happen. And again, this gives me flashbacks to the Howard Dean days.
Oh.
When Dean was the favorite of the progressives, and you said, you know what, I don't think he's going to win, and I don't think he's doing himself any favors here, and everybody got mad at me.
Yeah. I will say this.
But you know what? It was true.
The disappointed Dean people did a terrific job integrating themselves into the party and changing the way things happen.
Howard Dean went on to become Democratic chair, and he did a fantastic job with 50-state strategy and so on and so forth. But, you know, he wasn't going to be the Democratic nominee. Bernie isn't going to be the Democratic nominee, in my view. Yeah. No, it's not over. Yes, there's a lot of time left. But, you know, he's not expanding his base any more than Trump is expanding his. And if you can't expand your base, you're not going to win.
Yeah. What happened to that bird that landed near him? Can we get that guy back?
Yeah, I suppose. So, you know, Larry David, I don't know. Sorry. So that's part of the whole dynamic here. So here's a NBC Wall Street Journal poll came out. This is their June poll, and it doesn't have head-to-heads, but interestingly, what it does have is a little different. And I gave you the graphic there. It's about 2/3 of the way down. It's right before the little wise guy clip from Stephanopoulos. It says data shown among registered voters versus data shown among Democratic primary voters. And the table is looking at enthusiastic, comfortable, have some reservations, very uncomfortable, don't know, not sure. Mm-hmm. Right? For example, among registered voters, Donald Trump, 23% enthusiastic.
Yes.
14% comfortable. 10% have some reservations. 52% very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look all that good.
No.
Compared to, let's say, Joe Biden. This is among all voters. Joe Biden is 13% enthusiastic, 27% comfortable. Guess what? Uncle Joe leads in the comfortable category.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's where you would expect him to be.
And if you add enthusiastic and comfortable together, Trump comes out at 37, and Biden comes out at 40.
Okay.
Have some reservations. Trump 10, very uncomfortable 52. Biden is 25, has some reservations, and very uncomfortable 31. Right? So Trump's at 62 if you add those two together, and Biden's at 56. But the difference is that it's like, I really don't want Trump dominates, and I'm not sure that I want this guy is really where Biden is.
That feels right.
Okay. So let's take a look at, I don't know, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. They're the only ones that really have enough juice to comment on. Warren, 13% enthusiastic, same as Biden.
Okay.
Bernie Sanders, 10% enthusiastic, less than Biden or Warren. Note that.
Yes. Slightly.
Okay. Comfortable. Biden's at 27, Warren's at 21, Bernie's at 23. All right. Have some reservations. Biden's 25, Warren's 17, Bernie's 22.
Okay.
Very uncomfortable. Biden's 31, Warren's 33, Sanders is 41.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at the general electorate, Biden does a little bit better than Warren and Sanders. Warren and Sanders are doing similarly, but a lot more people have made up their mind about Sanders and Trump. That they're uncomfortable.
Okay.
Trump more than Sanders.
As it
And that's a
should be.
problem for Bernie. He's got to get people to be less uncomfortable about him.
Yes. Uncomfortable.
Yeah. Got to be more comfortable. All right. Now, let's look at the Democratic primary voters. And this, I think, tells you more about where things are going than the head-to-heads or who do you want to vote for today. This is among Democratic primary voters only. But when you look at the matchups, remember, most Democrats are looking for who could beat Trump. And if Biden fits the comfortable lane there in your final four, enthusiastic, comfortable, have some reservations, very uncomfortable. The comfortable is the number one seed there, right? So Biden does best.
As with shoes.
Data shown among Democratic primary voters.
Okay.
Elizabeth Warren, enthusiastic 26, Biden 23, Sanders 22. Nobody else counts. Everybody else is 4 or less. So if you're looking for enthusiastic voters and you say, Biden just isn't doing it for me, you got to have that enthusiasm. He actually has, by 23 to 22, his voters are more enthusiastic than Bernie's.
All right. So he's got something.
But Warren leads on that.
Yeah.
So again, for those
true.
people saying, I don't understand how Biden is winning, look at these numbers and say, this is why Biden is winning at the moment. All right. Comfortable. Warren's 38, Biden's 43, Sanders 34.
Okay.
So Elizabeth Warren, by a few points, has the most enthusiastic, but Biden has the most comfortable. And that most comfortable at 43 is the biggest number.
Okay. Yes. Right.
Okay. Have some reservations. Warren 18, Biden 24, Bernie 28.
Oh.
Among Democrats. All right. And very uncomfortable among Democrats.
Yes.
Warren's a 9, Biden's an 8, Bernie's a 15.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So among Democrats, you look at these numbers and say, if there's only room for Sanders and Warren, Warren is beating Sanders.
Yeah. I figure out if there's only room for one of them. Yeah. I guess so. It sure looks like it. Every category, I don't see anywhere that he's doing better. Even though sometimes it's pretty close, it's negligible difference, but
Right, and in this, that's right. There is a negligible difference. I'm not trying to say 23 is so much greater than 22.
it is not.
But the point is that Biden is in the mix there with enthusiastic, certainly leads with comfortable.
Yeah.
It's how people feel
Yeah. So he's leading across the board in the meh
in the
ratings.
comfy chair vote.
Yeah. He's all right.
Yeah, he's all right.
It's
He's all right.
exciting after 50 years in politics to be like, it's how you're rated. Yeah. It's okay.
Now, there was one other very interesting thing that gets away from horse race a little bit. But again, this isn't a head-to-head horse race. This is just, how do you, what's your hot, cold temperature thing about this particular candidate? I'm just trying to make the point that Biden does no worse, no better than anybody else. And saying, oh, well, everybody knows that everybody hates Biden. No, it's not what this is showing.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it doesn't show it.
Right.
What are you going to do?
And so, again, I think it highlights some of the problems Bernie's running into this time around. Now, and that's true both with the general electorate and with the Democratic primary. His brand is strong enough so that people have strong feelings about it.
Yeah. I mean, he wouldn't be anywhere near this if this was his first race. You can at least say that he's built himself a brand, and he did it in a very sparse field last time, which is perfect.
Do you believe that?
Yeah,
I believe that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It would have been a very different thing, I think, the Sanders phenomenon would likely have been very different against 20 competitors last time.
So let's say that's true. Let's posit that
Because
that
it's a
is
different
correct.
race. That makes sense. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay. All right. Then when Bernie supporters tell you, well, the only reason Biden is winning is because he has name recognition, that argument collapses. It forms a black hole. It
I guess
disappears.
so. I mean,
Bernie's name recognition is outstanding.
it is now. Yes, he did a great job building it last time. I don't
He
know
did.
that he could have built it.
He was the
same way
runner-up
last
for
time.
president.
It
People
hadn't-
know who he is. So if you're saying, oh, well, Biden is leading Sanders because Biden has name recognition and Sanders doesn't, that's not a very compelling argument.
I guess not. Although, I mean, I do think there's a difference, I would guess, between name recognition that comes from 50 years in federal elected politics.
We're talking about Democratic primary voters.
And B, being the vice president and being, I did a pretty good job running last time
Mike
in
Pence is the
primaries.
vice president. He
versus-
was vice president 80,000 years ago.
Yes. Well, right. They didn't have television, so the end. But I don't know. Being vice president for 8 years versus I did a pretty good job in some primaries.
I get
once.
that Biden has name recognition.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to point out, so does Bernie. And so
Yes,
the
he
idea
does.
that Biden wins on name recognition alone is not a compelling argument because Bernie also has name recognition. And why isn't he
I
leading?
just think less, but yeah, well, because he has less name recognition. He just didn't. He didn't catch up
people
all
know
50
who he
years.
is and they're
4 years
uncomfortable
ago.
about him is why.
That certainly could be true. He's
That's what the numbers
an
say.
iconoclast and proud of it, and that makes people uncomfortable sometimes. That's the point of it.
What's the difference between iconoclast and stubborn?
A couple of
What's the
syllables.
difference between eccentric and crazy? Usually how
Now?
much money you have, actually.
Yeah, right. Not the case here. Yeah, I mean, he's built name recognition, but he's once, 4 years ago he ran in a primary
He's got
and did
very,
pretty good.
very devoted supporters who really aren't interested in anybody else. When I think of the character that I'm trying to convey with that statement, I think of Rosa DeMoro, the National Nurses United, California Nurses Association,
Oh,
who's
okay.
super into Bernie and nobody else.
Okay. Yeah, well,
Can be off-putting when you're trying to persuade.
I guess so. Well, we'll see what happens after this next
Right, which doesn't make
primary
you
is
wrong.
over.
Just
Right.
a question of persuasion. That's all. Anyway, I did mention that there's something else in the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, and that is the story they have out today talking about that poll. More Democratic voters believe Congress should begin impeachment hearings on Trump's conduct while in office, but the country at large remains divided on the matter, according to a new national poll, NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. Overall, 27% of Americans say there's enough evidence to begin impeachment hearings now, up 10 points from last month.
Oh. Okay.
But that's 27%, up
Yeah.
10 points, and they only got to 27%.
Yes.
Another
10
24
points
think
is good
Congress
to
should
know.
continue investigating to see if there's enough evidence to hold impeachment hearings, which is down 8 points. But you know what? You can combine those two, because you can make the argument that people don't really understand the difference between investigating for impeachment and impeachment.
Yes, and
Fine.
the way they sort of put that one there, we should keep
So that's
investigating.
so that's at 51 if you add those two together, generously saying it's the same thing. And 48% believe that Congress should not hold impeachment hearings and that Trump should finish out his term.
Okay. Well,
And that's
there's Trump
unchanged.
about it. Yeah. Okay. How can it be unchanged?
Clearly, Abby
entirely?
votes for that one.
I guess so. That's outrageous, but I'm amazed that. I guess it's really evidence that a lot of people really don't necessarily understand what they're being asked, or we need to work on these questions a little bit.
Right. And so almost all the growth in support for impeachment has come from Democrats, with 48% of them wanting impeachment now versus 30% who said this a month ago. That's a big jump.
Yes, that's true. 48. That's a rather large number that has to be paid
But
attention
not
to.
a majority.
No, but that's actually like a majority minus noise at this point.
Among
sure.
independents, 22% support impeachment, 34% want to continue investigating, 44% oppose.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting there. I mean, I've always made the case it's kind of a tide and it takes its own sweet time, but it's certainly moving in the impeachment direction.
Yeah, and then his confession last week will probably help with that.
Right. Trump is currently at 44. In terms of job approval, his lowest ratings come from independents, 37%, women 36, Latinos 32, African Americans 17, and Democrats 11. Who are those 11? They must live in the Florida Panhandle. Wow. Looking ahead to the 2020 presidential election, a combined 37% of registered voters say they're enthusiastic or comfortable about voting for Trump. 52% say they're very uncomfortable. That's compared to 40% who are enthusiastic.
Same formulation. Was it the same poll?
Yeah, that's the one we were talking about there. And Armando points out it's the same thing. I think it's totally legitimate to put the investigation and impeachment together and say those are the numbers. So it's really 50-50. But let me tell you about the key players here. Here's from a New York Times story. As a former federal prosecutor, Representative Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey.
Yes.
This is Vinny from the Bronx. This is a Mr. Richard Fader who lives in Fort Lee, New Jersey, says he relies on evidence. She relies on evidence, and she needs more of it before considering whether to impeach President Trump. Ditto for Representative Elisa Slotkin of Michigan, former CIA officer who's been studying the chapter on impeachment. And for Representative Lucy McBath of Georgia, who says she's old enough to remember Watergate. And Representative Abigail Spanberger, there's your Abigail Spanberger reference, swats away the question. I'm focused on prescription drugs and infrastructure. In a house that can be dominated by loud voices on the left, these lawmakers form the backbone of a quiet power center. And centrist majority makers like Cheryl Slotkin, McBath, and Spanberger, all from districts won by Mr. Trump, will most likely have the final say on impeachment. And before you despair or disparage, the Times interviewed 15 of these folks. And Shalala of Florida says, I'm looking for a clear narrative the American people understand. And the thing that struck me is actually Harley Ruda. With Mr. Trump blocking Democrats' access to witnesses and documents, some frontline Democrats are casting caution aside. This is where you see the movement. Representative Harley Ruda, a freshman Democrat from California, defeated the veteran Republican Dana Rohrabacher. Right. Wasn't that, was he one of the Russians?
He was a kind of wasn't he? Yes. He
has set a June 30 deadline for himself. If the White House is still stonewalling by then, he said he'll advocate opening an impeachment inquiry even if it costs him his seat. Okay. I'm going to do what I think is right, Mr. Ruda said in an interview, and if at the end of the day in a future election I lose it because of where I stand on the principles of the Constitution, so be it. I'll wake up in the morning knowing I did the right thing. That's not a guy who is going to hold out against impeachment forever.
I guess not. Why don't I have that? I feel like I retweeted that article earlier, but I don't have it in pocket. I'm going to need that.
Okay, well, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
In fact, I think I did. But
probably, but
I gave you a picture snippet of that, but there's the articles. Liberals want Trump impeached, et cetera, et cetera. There is movement. And whatever you see on the surface with Pelosi trying to hold the caucus together, it's those centrists, as Bruce Bartlett has pointed out on Twitter, there is actually a group of centrist Democrats. There is no such thing on the Republican side. No, they're all radicals.
Should interview.
But there actually are centrist Democrats. In fact, it's half the party. Yeah. And so you have to consider that when you consider what the party's doing and so on and so forth. And we saw that in terms of move ahead versus look behind and so on and so forth. You know, those who advocate for impeachment have to acknowledge that the party's split on it, and we have to do better messaging in terms of convincing people.
Okay. So start.
Oh, okay. I think Trump is our best advocate, and so that's why I don't mind when he gets a lot of press.
Okay. That's it? Are we done? Yeah, all right.
Well, he's convincing people. He's moved true. Democrats, more than 10 points.
But he's
goading 18 points in the last month. Yeah. So, yeah, it works.
I got goaded.
Now, you can't just count on dry hearings. If you do that, there'll be a helicopter crash and nobody will watch.
Right.
Been there, done that. In fact, we did that last week. So now I think I see some suggestions that what Democrats are going to do now are try to get the Chris Christies and Corey Lewandowskis and those who didn't work for the White House and therefore do not have executive privilege. And then it'll be fun to see Trump assert, oh, well, executive privilege now applies to them as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, boy. Is he going crazy with his executive
by constitutional definition, it applies to everybody who says something bad about me. And if it doesn't, then I have these contracts that you signed that say that you're not allowed to say bad stuff. Non-disclosure agreements. Yeah. NDAs, right? So anyway, we'll see. I think that the party's going to have to move to impeachment because I think the majority of the party is going to be there, within the month or so.
Yeah,
and that's because
till
Trump
June.
is not cooperating.
Yes. Where did Ruta say his deadline was the end of this month?
The end of this month.
Wow. Okay. Well,
Right?
we'll see how many
And,
people are with
by the
him.
way, it's June 17th. We're talking about 2 more weeks.
Okay. Yeah. So
that, and then we'll
Count
see
it
what
down.
happens when people watch the Democratic
2
debates,
weeks.
see whether or not impeachment comes up. That's also in 2 weeks.
yeah. Well, it makes sense that would be the unit. Trump keeps saying everything will 2 weeks, fairly soon, very soon. You'll see.
Right. Armando says Pelosi will never let impeachment happen. Well, you know what? If Harley Ruta and Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger say impeach, then she'll say, okay.
I guess so. You have to do whatever Abigail.
She is
Spanberger
protecting
says.
them. That is her job. That's how she sees her job anyway.
That's true, and that's not a bad person to peg it to if you never want it to happen. Abigail Spanberger. We got Harley Ruta says 2 weeks to impeachment. Abigail Spanberger still thinks it's infrastructure.
It's about drug prices.
Sure. Yeah. What did I see this morning? One of the veteran Capitol Hill reporters saying, just noting for the record, that Congress has been harping on and saying they're on the cusp of doing something about prescription drug prices since I started
As
this
long
job.
as Trump has been on the cusp of giving us a health care plan that'll take care of it.
Longer. Yeah. He was saying, since I started this job, they've been saying they were going to do it.
Right.
So.
Anyway, that's the lay of the land. I'm pro-impeachment, but you have to recognize where people are at.
Yes. Well, that was a good point. I mean, I don't know how indicative Harley Ruta is of anything, but it's good to see that there's some.
He's in the
out there.
mix, and if you get those guys thinking about it and put a little pressure on them, if you're going to pressure anybody, pressure them. That's how you
Yes.
pressure Pelosi. Otherwise, she's immune.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's true. That's how it's supposed to be done. So we know nothing changes for us here in terms of what we're supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And nor did anyone think it would. Trump's still president. So how
Right.
else could you approach it?
So I don't know what you're going to do for the rest of your show,
Me neither.
but if you want a good, long think piece, I got one for you.
Yes. Let's say yes to that.
Okay, let's say yes, and then
no
you can say,
read it.
okay, we're going to do something else, and nobody will remember.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
2 weeks. I'll read it in 2 weeks.
So this is in The Guardian, and it's by political scientist Cas Mudde, M-U-D-D-E, who's Dutch, speaks English, though.
Cool.
Teaches here, but
Mudde.
talks about there. And it's why copying the populist right isn't going to save the left. Social democratic parties have been losing ground for more than 2 decades, but pandering to right-wing anxieties about immigration is not the solution.
Oh.
He's looking at France. He's looking at the Democratic Party in Italy, the Social Democrats in Germany, Clinton, Blair, people who think that, if only the left would be a little more clear on immigration, we could win back those voters. And he says that's a bunch of nonsense.
Okay.
And then he
Good.
talks about why. Very good.
Cool. That's fine by me. I'm okay with that one.
The key to
Thanks,
reviving the
Cass.
fortunes of social democracy is not to pander to the nativism of part of the white working class, but to embrace the ideas and policies that are fundamental to social democracy: egalitarian social justice, solidarity, the right to social protection, and a comprehensive welfare state. These values represent a widely shared common sense of the vast majority of Europeans in the second half of the 20th century, before their hegemony was eroded by 3 decades of neoliberal ideas and policies. The only way back for social democracy is to fight to make those values dominant once again. Actually, that's what Macron is trying to do. Whether he's good at it or not is another story. But part of the issue there, which is relevant here, is the idea that those people who used to vote for FDR and Obama suddenly switched and voted for Trump. And Cas Mudde makes the argument that, you know what, the vast majority of people don't fit into that category. Yeah, you had switchers, but most of the people who voted for Trump never would have voted for FDR. And they were who they were the entire time. Armando could tell you about Florida. They came out of the woodwork rather than Florida suddenly changed its mind.
Yes. They were always there.
They were always there. And those are not necessarily the people who voted for Obama last time.
Yes.
Right? The
Not
people
likely.
who don't want Confederate monuments taken down were not necessarily the people who voted for Obama last time. It's a different group of people, and thinking they're the same and somehow trying to appeal to them isn't going to work. Now, there are a small number of people, 5 to 8%, who might fit in that category. They're different.
Yes, they live in focus groups.
Yeah, but that small 5 to 8% is way large enough to affect swing states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, for example. But the vast majority of Trump voters are never going to vote for a Democrat. They're evangelicals.
Yes. And you know what
and
they're
so
like.
The idea of appealing to them in some way that appeals to some small part of what they think about it in this country in terms of abortion policy, right? If you try to accommodate the evangelicals, they're not going to vote for you.
No.
No matter what you do. Total
wouldn't-
waste of time. Don't do that. Don't pander to them.
Yeah. Obviously, I think. But as you mentioned that, rolling by on my Twitter screen is a report that here we go, short version of this story. It says right up top, Southern Baptist pastor who wanted women executed for abortions has just been arrested for raping a child. So, it's very difficult to accommodate those guys and have a coherent position. And maybe that's part of the reason.
Maybe. All right. Well, you got the next
Super
hour,
weird.
so you can talk about whatever you want, because after all, it's your show. But in the meantime, I've been wasting your time. This is Greg Working speaking with my good friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. David and I have been talking politics for decades, along with Armando and our other friends. And we just, we're doing it on podcast. That's all.
Yes. Armando's doing it right now. You just can't hear him. That's absolutely true. We may have to give him a chance to be heard, though. Thanks very much, Greg.
Take care. I hope Armando does come on. Take care.
Yeah, me too. All right, take care. We'll see you on Wednesday. Thanks for the help with the first hour of the program. Time for us to take a minute out so that there's only 59 minutes left when we come back. What a productive use of the first moment of our second hour. We'll get back to that crazy story of the Southern Baptist preacher probably just for a little while after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I'm serious. I guess we really should take a look at this thing. It's not where I planned to go, but, what a way out, right? This is why you don't bother trying to accommodate these guys. The report I have here, the write-up I have for it, is from a blog, and of course they're coming at this with a particular viewpoint in mind. It's the Friendly Atheist blog. And he's not feeling all that friendly towards this particular person, but that's the way it goes. A pastor who wanted women executed for abortions was arrested for raping a child. Hemant Mehta is our writer here. Let's see what the straight news report of this looks like. I'm a little curious now. The AP news that he uses as a link. Ex-pastor in Texas accused of sexually abusing teen relative. That is a very exciting story. However, I'm of a mind to hand it over to the Friendly Atheist in terms of expressing this with greater outrage. And he begins this way. The short version of this story is that a Southern Baptist pastor was arrested for sexually assaulting a minor. The longer version of this story is somehow even more disturbing. Usually more details are more disturbing. A couple months ago, Texas was considering a ban on abortions that would have subjected women, not just doctors, to the death penalty, because that's what it means to be pro-life in Texas, as well as stabbing alligators in the head. A Republican state legislator, Jeff Leach, said he couldn't support the Abolition of Abortion in Texas Act because he felt only doctors should be punished, and the bill eventually died. That's how it got killed, I guess. Jack Graham, the pastor of a Houston megachurch, and why not, even praised Leach, who happened to be a member of his congregation, for his courageous decision. But that exchange infuriated Stephen Bratton, the pastor at Grace Family Baptist Church, who had publicly testified in defense of the bill. He soon penned a lengthy rebuke of Graham for supporting a man who had prevented the passage of an anti-abortion bill, in a red state no less, and for allowing supposed murder to continue unabated. and I guess this is part of his op-ed. You have used the power of the pulpit and your influence as one who is supposed to speak for the Lord to effectively endorse the murder of another 55,000 children in Texas in the next year and 110,000 over the next 2 years before our legislature meets again. Takes a while down in Texas, I guess. Because you are not ignorant of the Word of God, you are held more accountable for your actions. You have been given much influence through the pulpit and your leadership in the Southern Baptist Convention. Much will be required from you as you stand before the Lord. Your endorsement of the shelving of HB 896, which is exactly what the Lord wants to talk to you about, is essentially authorizing the deaths of approximately 110,000 preborn children in this state, and you will be held accountable before God for those deaths. Because you have endorsed this position, you have removed justice from the equation, thereby giving sinful men and women no reason to discontinue the act of murder. Back to our writer. See, everyone, unlike Graham, Bratton cared about children, preborn and presumably otherwise. As a pastor, he understood the influence he had. He also understood the importance of moral integrity, because he would one day stand before the Lord. In hindsight, that was quite a statement coming from Bratton, because a month after he wrote that public denunciation against Graham, he confessed to his fellow church leaders that he had repeatedly raped an underage relative. I feel like sad trombone noise for that one, but unfortunately there's an underage relative involved there, and she's not going to like that. But amazing, isn't it? If it's a good thing this doesn't keep happening over and over. No wonder he wanted to protect the unborn, the article continues. In a few years, they could become his victims, right? Can you believe it? In 10 years, I'll be raping you. The pastors at his church immediately told law enforcement. I guess that they believe in. Did they tell the FBI? I don't know. You hear things, maybe you rape a little bit, then you decide, how can I be sure if it's a bad rape unless I do it? The pastors at his church immediately told law enforcement on Friday. Bratton, the father of 7, boy, are they happy, was arrested just before Father's Day. How interesting is that? Bratton is accused of abusing the child from 2013 to 2015 with inappropriate touching that escalated to sexual intercourse multiple times a day or several times a week, according to Senior Deputy Thomas Gilliland. There are no other known victims, according to church leaders. After they heard the first one, they put their hands over their ears and said, "La, la, 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 I can't hear you, and neither can the Lord." All of this happened just as the Southern Baptist Convention had its annual gathering, with the focus being the prevention of sexual abuse within the member churches. Well, see what motivated them to speak up, I guess. Grace Family Baptist Church released its own statement on Saturday saying Bratton is no longer in a position of leadership at the church and is no longer receiving a salary. They added that he was excommunicated by the church the week after he confessed his crimes to the pastors, meaning they've washed their hands clean of him. All things considered, the church appeared to handle things appropriately, or properly anyway. They told authorities as soon as they knew something, and they have fully cooperated in the investigation. They made it clear Bratton will have nothing to do with them in the future. All that's left is to make sure there are no more victims or anyone who had any knowledge of the abuse in the church itself. Even though Bratton abused a relative, it's not clear if his authority in the church had anything to do with it. A little soul searching might be useful too. How was Bratton able to keep this hidden for so long with no one in the church knowing anything about it? Maybe they should focus on getting their own house in order before passing judgment on women who choose to have abortions. In any case, consider the hypocrisy of how Bratton wanted women to be put to death for wanting control over their own bodies, all while he was literally raping a child multiple times a day. When women make what they feel is a responsible choice, Bratton wants them killed. Now he's on the verge of pleading guilty to child sex abuse. Will he ask for leniency? Bratton was apparently released from custody after boasting a $50,000 bond, because no one ever skips out on $50,000 after they've been accused of raping children. Okay. Well, an interesting story and a little bit of a diversion from where we... Oh, but, you know, it became of interest because it's really not that much of a diversion from where we otherwise would have been. All right. Let's see. Time to check in a few other items. of interest. How deeply will we go into the? Should we go into the transcripts? I'm not certain how much time we ought to spend on that one. Let's see. A couple of other. These are some long reads. Let me jump over to here. Follow up from last week. A piece from the Washington Post. There is no accountability. That's a quote that's in the headline. There's no accountability. Trump, White House aides signal a willingness to act with impunity in drive for re-election. I think I saw a good tweet that summarized it all over the weekend, and I'll have to scroll back, but basically it was, laying out where we stood heading into the election, and then, and especially into the beginning of this week, shorter term, into the beginning of this week, thinking about the impeachment question again. There we are. Who is this? Jake McCobie. Is that right? Former chief speechwriter for Eric Holder, and both attorneys general, Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, who put things this way. Oops, I've made a huge mistake in trying to figure out who said the thing. Where did it put me back to here? I'm going to have to I scrolled, I had it, then I went to identify the speaker, and that threw me off balance here. But basically, it's right around here, wasn't it? There it is. Trump saying, I'm going to cheat again, as he did to Stephanopoulos last week. Russia, we're going to help again. Republicans, we're going to allow it again. Democrats, looking forward to competing in a normal election. It's going to be great, everybody. So, let me single that one out and make sure everybody's got it available, and I can share it with you later. But, so skipping over here to the Washington Post. There's no accountability. Trump and White House aides signal a willingness to act with impunity and drive for re-election. Just leave it to the ballot box, everybody. No bad things are going to happen. It's all going to be totally normal. And by the way, marked increase, I would say, in the number of people discussing the possibility that Trump doesn't leave office even if he loses. And that's probably driven in part by the fact that Trump himself has been saying, well, I might not even leave office. Even if I win, I might not leave office after the end of my second term. He's musing aloud now about whether or not the people will demand that he continue into a third term. I'm sure everybody's clamoring for that. David Nakamura and Holly Bailey wrote this piece, though, for the Washington Post. Slumping in the polls and at war with his political rivals, President Trump has signaled a willingness to act with impunity. Well, a desire, anyway, to act with impunity. But I'm sure a willingness to act and a willingness to try to do so with impunity by blocking all investigations of what he's doing, I guess. Signaled a willingness to act with impunity in his drive for re-election, or whatever he would call it, taking steps over the past week that demonstrate a disregard for legal boundaries meant to hold him accountable and protect the sanctity of American democracy. Ordinarily, that would be where you would end an article and say, we must do something, please arrest this guy immediately. All normal procedures after this point are suspended. Total emergency. We are actually writing in the Washington Post that the president is on an active program to destroy the sanctity of American democracy. But in these days, there's more. Trump said in an interview that he would accept damaging information on his election opponents from foreign entities, defiantly unrepentant after spending 2.5 years trying to fight off allegations that his 2016 campaign had colluded with Russia to help him win the White House. The president declared he would not punish White House counselor Kellyanne Conway, except for firing her company, I guess, after a federal agency recommended she be fired for violating rules barring executive branch officials from engaging in political activities. The White House asserted executive privilege in a bid to shield documents from Congress over the administration's decision to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census, prompting lawmakers to hold 2 Trump cabinet officials in contempt. Taken together, The action set off new alarm bells among legal analysts and Trump's political rivals, who warned that the president and his aides have emerged from the scorched earth battle over the special counsel's 22-month investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election with a conviction that they need not feel constrained by the safeguards built into the nation's political system as they look to 2020. We're at a bad place. They're emboldened and not trying to hide it anymore, said Glenn Kirshner, a legal analyst who spent 3 decades as a federal prosecutor. Pointing to Trump's interview with ABC News' George Stephanopoulos, during which the president said he would listen to foreign countries offering damaging information on his general election opponent, Kirshner said the lesson Trump took away from special counsel Robert Mueller's 448-page redacted report was that his campaign suffered no consequences for holding meetings with Russian operatives they believed had damaging information about Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. Mueller did not establish a criminal conspiracy, even though several Trump associates were indicted on charges of lying to investigators. They realized they could get away with it, Kirshner said. There's no accountability. Trump sought to do damage control Friday after a political backlash to his remarks, calling in to the sympathetic Fox and Friends show to say that he would look at information from a foreign entity to determine whether it was bad, and then turn it over to the FBI or Attorney General. It is illegal to accept election assistance from a foreign national, a point that Federal Election Commission Chairman Ellen Weintraub reiterated Thursday in the wake of the outcry over Trump's position. But the president's equivocations over how he would handle such a scenario were echoed by his campaign, which spokeswoman Kayleigh McEnany, is that right, McEnany? I don't think I've ever heard of her, said would assess the matter on a case-by-case basis. Oh, boy. He said he would likely do both, which you can't do. Listen to what they have to say, but also report it to the FBI. She told CBSN. Look, I'm like, CBSN? Is that CBS News? CBSN? Why not just CBS? I don't know what that is. I've never seen it written that way. That's unusual. Okay. Calling it the president's directive. Trump's supporters said his political rivals have fanned a faux controversy as part of an ongoing effort to make the election a referendum on his conduct, as if it wasn't going to be, and intemperate behavior rather than a contest of policy ideas. How else could it be held, really, honestly? I'm not sure some of these side excursions resonate in Iowa, said Jeff Kaufman, chairman of the Iowa Republican Party, who warmed up the crowd with that, really, at a GOP fundraising dinner Trump attended last week. I don't think a successful Democratic campaign would be one that focuses on Mueller or one particular tweet. I don't think that's going to work. He added, I really think of the old phrase, it might not be good to drink water out of a fire hose. I'm not certain that means what he thinks it means in this instance. Democrats have created so many avenues of criticism, everything becomes a bit of a blur. Well, we didn't create them, but okay. Republican leaders have offered a mixed response, with many stating that despite Trump's contention that all members of Congress do it, they would unequivocally reject information offered by foreign entities. Some also, though, joined Trump in his campaign by attempting to shift the focus on the fact that Democrats they say, financed the work of a former British intelligence officer who compiled a dossier about Trump and his alleged ties to Russia. Yes, that's their current conflation game. Well, you see, he used to be an intelligence officer, and he used to be an intelligence officer for Britain, and that's a foreign entity, and so you are saying you would accept information that was damaging about your opponent from that person. But of course, I think one major distinction here is that when Steele found out what he found out through his investigation, what did he do with the information? He didn't go to Hillary Clinton's campaign and say, I'll sell it to you. He went to the FBI and said, I just found out that Trump could be colluding with the Russians and be totally compromised, and it would be a huge, huge national security issue, not only for the United States, but throughout the West, throughout the Western Alliance. He told the FBI. Guy went to the FBI. But okay, yeah, sure, hold him up as an example. Trump's brazen posture has contributed to hand-wringing among Democrats, that was always going to happen, about the rules of combat in 2020. Sue Dvorsky, a former chairwoman of the Iowa Democratic Party, described Trump as a human flashbang grenade, interesting, and said everybody in the party is wrestling with the questions of not just how to go at Trump, but how the rules of political warfare in general have changed. The debate centers on how the party competes with the sitting president, who so openly flouts the norms of political conduct and ethics, and whether Democrats should consider doing the same. In fact, nearly all of the 2020 Democratic campaigns have agreed verbally not to use stolen or hacked material in the race in recent weeks, but most candidates have not signed a written pledge circulated by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who is one of 23 Democratic candidates. Well, that's because she's one of 23 Democratic candidates, but okay, we're not going to be able to put somebody up on the stage with him and beat him at his own game, Dvorsky said. There are no rules to his own game. We're not getting in a ring with some sort of antiquated Marquis of Queensberry rules. This guy is a WWE fighter, which is appropriate because that's fake, I guess. Trump has demonstrated time and again his willingness to go to the mat to protect his interests and allies in response, well, some allies anyway. In response to the U.S. Office of Special Counsel's finding last week that Conway had on several occasions violated the Hatch Act, which prohibits most presidential aides from engaging in political activities, Trump defended her as a terrific person and suggested she was the aggrieved party. It looks to me like they're trying to take away their right of free speech, and that's just not fair, Trump told Fox and Friends of Conway, a ferocious campaign aide in 2016 who became one of his longest-serving White House advisors. She's got to have the right of responding to questions from reporters. The White House, well, that's not really actually a problem, but okay. The White House has also sought to prevent former Trump aides and government officials from cooperating with congressional probes into Russian interference. The president's tax returns and the administration's efforts to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census, which Democrats have said could lead to inaccurate results. It's a roundabout way of saying things. Simon Rosenberg, president of NDN, a liberal think tank, said Trump is acting out of desperation to fundamentally change the political landscape in hopes of improving his poll numbers. Last week, ABC News reported that Trump's internal polling data from March showed him trailing former Vice President Joe Biden in key swing states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Florida, and just running barely ahead in Texas. Trump campaign officials said the data was outdated and misleading based on worst-case scenarios, and that more recent surveys that added descriptions of policies have had better results for the president, although that data has not been made public. When a candidate is in trouble, they start looking to do extraordinary things, Rosenberg said. This is an extraordinary challenge to our democracy. The president is operating as if the rule of law is for little people, and for big people like him, it doesn't apply. Well, kind of a weak ending for the reminder, though, but I think the headline does more of the work here. Just keep that in mind. And if that doesn't do it, then I guess I'd recommend for you the tweet that we had read earlier. Just looking to participate in a normal election here on the Democratic side. Really not up to the job versus what we're facing here. Okay, let's see. So many other things to catch up on. 10:21. I guess we got room for a couple more of these things. Let's give some time over to the lawfare sector, if you will. They often contribute some interesting things to the discussion. And what's her name? Quinta Jurecic has been Jurassic Park, I guess, has been very interesting. I'm not certain how she pronounces that last name, and I should probably look up an interview with her and see if we can figure it out. Jurecic. Anybody have any idea? I think she's got 2 articles in my queue here. Let me see which one makes the most sense to go with chronologically. Did she write both of these? Yeah. So maybe we could go. Well, I was going to say chronological order, but one of them is actually a little bit older than the other, so I don't know if that's necessarily the way I'll do it. Let's go with this quicker hit before the break, I think. Nancy Pelosi's argument against impeachment doesn't make sense. Can you believe it? Yeah, it really doesn't. But it's interesting to watch the lawfare types, that sector of the legal analysis community, reaching this conclusion. So this was her Saturday piece, June 15th piece. Nancy Pelosi has made her position clear. She is not budging from her opposition to impeachment. And I think Armando said pretty much the same thing in the background before. The Speaker of the House considers those who advocate for impeachment proceedings to be naive political extremists. Folks who would help get Donald Trump reelected by insisting on a useless pose of ideological purity. And this may be overstating the case, but and that's an interesting thing, too. Usually you don't get her doing that, Quinta. But I think she's feeling the pressure here, too. Her leadership of the Democratic caucus consists in no small part of keeping people who favor impeachment or impeaching President Trump in check. She is a realist, a grown-up. I guess that's supposed to be her view of herself. And it ought to be. Anyway, there's only one problem. Her case against impeachment is incoherent. Uh-oh. Pelosi has made a number of arguments, not all of which hold any water, but she has made them. Donald Trump, she says, is not worth it. Impeachment would be the easy way out. Trump wants to be impeached so he can be exonerated by the Senate, and beginning proceedings would be a political gift to him. But Pelosi acknowledges, notwithstanding such dismissive rhetoric, that Trump is engaged in a criminal cover-up and that his actions are villainous to the Constitution. In fact, she says she wants to see him in prison. For all the different ways Pelosi has made her case, an implicit principle underlies her argument. Yes, the president's conduct is egregious, criminal even, but that egregious criminality does not require an impeachment or even the opening of an impeachment inquiry. Impeachment, in her view, is a constitutional tool the House is never required to use, an option, not a command. I guess that's not far off, really, right? Consequently, the House's decision not to impeach or to begin an inquiry is not a comment on whether or not impeachment is merited. Pelosi's comments that Trump's behavior is lawless and a gross abuse of the power of the presidency suggest that she believes it would be merited. In her view, the question of the merits of impeachment, that is, whether the president has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, is a threshold judgment only. Let's take this position seriously for a moment and consider a few hypotheticals. And there are some interesting ones. I'm not certain all of them are actually just hypothetical. Imagine, here's the first one, that instead of firing the FBI director in a fit of pique over the director's refusal to state publicly that the president is not under investigation and to scrap a probe into the president's former national security advisor, imagine instead that the president had ordered a drone strike on the FBI director's house. It's funny because some of these, almost all of them, you have to say, why not? I mean, why wouldn't he do this at this point if he believes what he says he believes? Hypothetical number 2. Or imagine that the president had repeatedly ordered the Secret Service to abduct underage girls to be brought into the Oval Office where he had assaulted them. Imagine that he had threatened the victims' families with arrest and prosecution if their children refused his advances. Imagine he also provided gifts to families that remained quiet, using funds appropriated by Congress for other purposes. It's about as bad an example as you could possibly... I mean, if you didn't buy into his shoot people on Fifth Avenue one, there's this one. Minus a few minor changes here, like the Secret Service doing the work. I'm not entirely sure, by the way, that the president hasn't repeatedly ordered the abduction of underage girls, though I don't have anything that leads me to the conclusion that they're being brought to the Oval Office where he's assaulting them. But he is abducting teenage girls at the border pretty regularly. He's just having ICE and Border Patrol do it instead of the Secret Service, and we don't know where they're going. That's another one of the big problems. I mean, I guess... have we solved that mystery? Are people more sure now of where the girls are going, or is it just lost in the blur of the sheer number of impeachable offenses and criminal acts these days? I'm not sure. Third hypothetical, by the way, imagine the president announced that he would preemptively pardon any law enforcement officer accused of killing a black person in the line of duty. no matter the circumstances. And it is added parenthetically here. This last example is adapted from a hypothetical posed by Charles Black in 1974, interestingly enough. Okay, let's cram in a little bit before we take our break. These scenarios are outlandish, but that's the point. They fulfill all of the conditions that various scholars describe as necessary to constitute an impeachable offense. I think it says office here. Okay. They all obviously meet the criteria for high crimes and misdemeanors for which a president may be impeached under the Constitution. They involve abuses of power and violation of the president's obligations to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Remember that one. And to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Some are criminal, some are not, but all are vile and as such beyond any plausible defense. We'll return for the balance of this one next. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. Except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Keeping one eye on court developments, which I guess looks like maybe tomorrow will be a great day to review what the court has been up to. I guess some decisions coming out in their final days of their term. Armando probably got at least one eye, if not both, on those. But let's continue with Quinta Jurecic and her piece, the most recent one, or not her, I don't know if it's her most recent, but the more recent of the two I put aside from Lawfare. With the 3 outlandish scenarios trying to illustrate, some, I guess we would say, crystal clear cases for impeachment, right? Now, that was the point of these things, that there be no doubt left in the minds of onlookers. If the president had committed any of these acts described above, and some of them he may have, would Pelosi really argue that a member of Congress who had sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and to well and faithfully discharge the duties of their office consider impeachment an option but not a requirement? Would she regard the House of Representatives as having no obligation to impeach him, or at the very least to begin an inquiry irrespective of the political benefits of doing so? Would she regard any obligation as depending on whether the Senate would likely convict, or whether the president might somehow benefit politically from the confrontation? Would she care if he wanted to be impeached under such circumstances? Would she suggest that he wasn't worth impeachment? I guess the answers to all these are supposed to be no, but I'm not certain that they are. Perhaps there is some politician who, faced with the conduct hypothesized above, would take the view that the House still does not have an obligation to impeach. Perhaps there is some politician who would elevate the discretionary political components of the impeachment power over all of their substantive legal content and ask only whether impeachment would be politically advantageous, boiling down the duty to support and defend the Constitution to a polling exercise. I actually doubt that Nancy Pelosi is this politician. I think she, like the rest of us, would recoil in horror under such circumstances and regard impeachment as required, even if the president's polling numbers were holding up well. If that's right, then it means that there is some point at which the president's conduct is so egregious that the House has no choice under the Constitution but to begin impeachment proceedings. But we don't. It's still premised on an if, though. I will point that out. Everything else is just haggling over the price. The only remaining question is where one draws the line between conduct that is impeachable but does not mandate impeachment and conduct that's so bad that impeachment becomes a constitutional obligation. This means that the issue before Nancy Pelosi today, in the non-hypothetical world in which we live, is whether the conduct described in the Mueller report, and in which the president has engaged publicly for the past 2 years does or does not cross that line. I think that's actually a fairly limited view of things, and once again remind you not to confine yourself to the four corners of the Mueller report. There's no reason to do that. Pelosi's actions so far indicate that she does not think Trump's actions cross it. She has hinted as much. Impeachment, quote, has to be about the truth and the facts to take you to whatever decision has to be there. Whatever that means. She told Fareed Zakaria recently, it should by no means be done politically. One can certainly make this judgment, but in making it, one has to at least acknowledge that the refusal to begin impeachment proceedings is in fact a judgment on the merits of the potentially impeachable offense. It's a judgment that the president's conduct, while bad, is not that bad. If that is the judgment Pelosi has made, she should stand behind it. And then get pummeled, I guess, is what we're supposed to reach. Let me add to that one a slightly different piece, but that I think overlaps in some ways. I don't think it was my original idea to overlap the two, but let's give this a try. This is a slightly older piece from the end of April of this year, April 29th. Same writer, Quinta Jurecic, also in Lawfare. Robert Mueller's Take Care Clause. I told you to take note of the Take Care Clause and keep it in mind for the time being. Let's take a look at this. Again, remember, this is end of April. When it was finally unveiled, the structure of the Mueller report was consistent with what onlookers expected. I've been making progress in reading through it, by the way. It's still slow going reading through the Mueller report. It's tough going. Trump, of course, insisted to George Stephanopoulos that he had read all the way through it, by the way. Another one of the crazy nuggets to come out of the interview was Trump, this time, I think, in the presidential limo, riding with Stephanopoulos, another television production thing. Again, I don't know whose idea it was to move locations over and over again, but insisting that the Mueller report exonerated him, and that when Stephanopoulos disagreed and said, it really doesn't. Well, did you really read the thing? Can you imagine Trump pressing George Stephanopoulos? Did you really read it? Yeah, I did, like 3 times. You totally didn't read it. No one believes that you could make it through the back of a cereal box, much less the Mueller report. But you're going to stand there and insist. So, I mean, watch out for that. That's actually the bigger picture arc of the day, is the idea that Trump will sit there telling someone as allegedly important as George Stephanopoulos on ABC News on camera, I read the report. You didn't read the report. It exonerated me. It didn't explicitly say that it doesn't exonerate me. And if you can swallow that and just move on and say, we'll have to leave it there, opinions differ, then, did you read the Electoral College report? It elected me. It didn't defeat me, he'll say in 2020, right? It was a record-breaking landslide win for me. Actually, it's the first time that somebody has gotten, one of the major party candidates has gotten 0 electoral votes, sir. Well, no, it's actually the opposite. I won them all. And in fact, I won electoral votes that didn't even exist earlier, but the American people, because they loved America so much, created new ones, and I won them 1,000,000-0. And then we all say, half of us, so you and I say, oh my God, he's a crackpot. We should at least 25th Amendment this guy. He's insane, criminally insane. Somebody should grab him and put him in a straitjacket and drag him kicking and screaming from the White House. And the rest of us will say, well, he's painted orange and has got a pink raccoon eye thing going on and says the opposite of reality, but he's wearing a suit. He's wearing a giant bouffant mullet thing, but paints his face orange, whatever. No, normal thing. It's tan. He's trying to look tan. That's not tan. It's a totally different look than tan. I don't know what's going on in his head. He's wearing a suit, man. I'm not certain that's a suit. It fits like a potato sack. I don't understand why you guys say this. We're just going to sit there and take it. Again, it's just an amazing thing. All right. So when it was unveiled, the structure of the Mueller report looked like what people expected, right? As Attorney General William Barr promised, Special Counsel Robert Mueller put together one volume on possible conspiracy between the Trump team and the Russian government and another on obstruction. Tucked into the back of the obstruction volume was a small 12-page section in which the special counsel's office tackled the legal arguments made by President Trump's attorneys in his defense. Mueller's legal analysis, examining the interaction between Article 2 and the obstruction statutes, is a rich text, and there's plenty to debate about his conclusions. But here I'm interested less in whether Mueller's legal reasoning is correct, and more in what the reasoning says about how the special counsel seems to understand both the presidency and this specific president. Of particular interest in this is this special counsel's reliance on the Take Care Clause, an evocative portion of the Constitution to focus on in a report concerning a man who has shown little inclination to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. This is a slightly different and interesting approach to what to do about this guy and is he impeachable. That's kind of why I thought this was an interesting addition to things. Barr's June 2018 memo to the president set out the argument that this section seems to counter. His argument was the president cannot obstruct justice by taking action solely under his Article 2 authority. From the Mueller report, it appears that the president's lawyers made a similar case over the course of several letters sent to the special counsel's office. 2 of those letters have been published by the New York Times, by the way. Mueller also addresses a statutory argument by the president's team regarding the scope of 18 U.S. Code Section 1512C, the General Obstruction Statute. But the real attraction is the constitutional analysis. The Take Care Clause plays a central role in Mueller's constitutional argument. Jack Goldsmith and John Manning have studied the protean nature of the clause and the many contradictory interpretations that courts have adopted. Here, Mueller's analysis has some resemblance to the understanding set out by Andrew Kent, Ethan Laib, and Jed Sugarman, who argue that the Take Care Clause imposes a, quote, duty of fidelity on the president. Mueller does adhere to well-established readings of the clause as empowering the president to exercise prosecutorial discretion and to remove officers, but he also reads it as constraining presidential action, writing that the concept of faithful execution connotes the use of power in the interest of the public, not in the office holder's personal interests. The duty to take care can also be, as Kent, Laib, and Sugarman write, a limitation on discretion. The core of Mueller's argument is that a presidential action taken with the corrupt intent necessary for an obstruction offense, by definition, violates the Take Care Clause. Corruptly sets a demanding standard, Mueller writes, and that standard parallels the president's constitutional obligation to ensure the faithful execution of the laws. On this basis, Mueller is able to argue that a general ban on corrupt action does not unduly intrude on the president's responsibilities, Congress's constitutional intent in defining the law, and the interests of the judiciary and the grand jury in being protected against obstructive acts weigh heavily against the relatively limited restriction on presidential actions imposed by the requirement that he not act for corrupt personal purposes. This actually, I think, probably ought to weigh on your conclusion that the OLC and Justice Department policy prohibit the indictment of a sitting president. The idea, of course, here is that it's twofold. One, that you can't get in the way of the execution of the president's duties. There are a number of national security and other presidential duties that could be disrupted to the detriment of the country and everyone in it if he were dealing with the headache of a criminal indictment. But there's also the question, and this is what they're really getting at in this article, and you'll see later on down the line, the question of whether or not it would overly politicize the Justice Department and Justice Department operations if they were free to indict a president for maybe beginning an action under what he thought was his Article 2 authority, but then continuing past all reasonable definitions of the extent of that authority, and worrying that either indicting this president or impeaching this president would somehow set a bad precedent and overly constrain future presidents who, if you look, if you took their actions and squinted at them just right, you might be able to come up with an argument why their actions had exceeded their Article 2 authority, or would even be able to claim that another president obstructed justice, strictly speaking. I mean, aren't there some circumstances under which a president would be duly authorized by the Constitution to do something which might otherwise, in the absence of that authority, be obstruction of justice? And there is an example, I think, laid out here in this article to clarify that, in case this is too abstract and doesn't appear to make concrete sense to you. The core of Mueller's argument is that a presidential action taken with the corrupt intent necessary for an obstruction offense, by definition, violates the take care clause, right? Again, so that if you are using the president's authority to exercise, say, prosecutorial discretion on behalf of the Department of Justice or whatever, or the Department of Justice is making that decision on its own under your authority as the unitary executive, and you could make the case that it's an obstruction issue, doesn't that mean that everybody will, in the future would be in trouble if you did this, if you impeached Donald Trump on this front now? And Quinta Jurecic is arguing that Robert Mueller is saying, well, as long as you differentiate by saying, look, there's no plausible argument that there is a national interest in this. There's a undeniable corrupt intent. The action very clearly is all about the personal and therefore corrupt interests of the person making the decision, the president. Let's move on so that we can get to the illustrative example. So, anyway, Mueller is saying that basically, look, a general ban on corrupt action, as long as you're banning corrupt action that's provably in the interest of the person making the decision, that won't unduly intrude on the president's responsibilities, right? Okay, here's how it's illustrated here. What about the risk, she asks, that applying the obstruction statutes to core Article 2 conduct will chill otherwise acceptable presidential behavior? Mueller is unconcerned, strikingly so, in fact, given the potentially hairy complications. His reasons why are equally striking. For one thing, and I guess this is a quote from the report, virtually everything the president does in the routine conduct of office will have a clear governmental purpose and will not be contrary to his official duty. Accordingly, the president has no reason to be chilled in those actions because, in virtually all instances, there will be no credible basis for suspecting a corrupt personal motive. That's the end of the quote. And it's telling, I think, and clearly illustrates one of the base assumptions that we made about the presidency prior to Donald Trump occupying the presidency. And I think a lot of people continued to make even while he was in office. Certainly in the early days when they thought, well, the grown-ups in the room will take care of things. We can still say that there's usually, in normal circumstances, no credible basis for suspecting corrupt personal motives in the decisions of presidents. Now, lots of people, individuals, do occasionally suspect corrupt personal motives in the actions of presidents. It's true. But the idea here is that, generally speaking, institutionally, and especially among those institutions that would have responsibility for conducting inquiries, oversight, impeachment, what have you, official proceedings that could actually change the condition of whether or not this person remains president of the United States, they're going to be very reluctant to approach things ordinarily. I mean, I guess you could see a Republican House doing this, say with, I don't know, Bill Clinton, and saying, yeah, we're just going to move forward with this thing regardless. But you could see them doing it to a Democrat. But I guess the worry is, well, wouldn't this happen for all presidents in the future? Investigations of the president, he notes, are surpassingly rare. And it is rarer still for circumstances to raise even the possibility of a corrupt personal motive for arguably obstructive action through the president's use of official power. Inquiries like this one, institutional inquiries like this, exceedingly rarely do they even begin, right? There aren't often special counsels or independent counsels investigating presidents. Despite the fact that we've had a number of them in the recent past, in the ordinary course of things, they're very rare. Even rarer still is that there would be circumstances, as he says, to even raise the possibility that the actual outcome of this investigation, I mean, we've seen lots of investigations of presidents. Fairly rarely do they actually come out at the end with an assertion that, yes, a corrupt personal motive is at the heart of what happened here. That's still pretty rare. Yes, you can think of another one, and yes, you probably think it was wrong, with respect to Bill Clinton, but ordinarily investigations like this lead to big shrug, like this one did. We don't know what to do, of course, for different reasons. Here they basically did everything they could to say, yeah, if this was anybody else, he'd be indicted. But because he's the president, he's not. But a lot of people are reading this, and a lot of people are aided in this interpretation of this thing by people like Barr and the president himself saying, yeah, it totally exonerates me, no collusion. It doesn't say somewhere the president's guilty of these things and you have to get rid of him. All right. So this last argument, remember that it is rarer still for circumstances to raise even the possibility of a corrupt personal motive for arguably obstructive action through the use of the president's official power. This last argument is a bit of an understatement, given the many unprecedented legal questions President Trump's behavior has engendered over the course of the Russia investigation. But that's just the point. By arguing that virtually everything the president does will not raise questions of obstruction, ordinarily, with an ordinary president, and underlining the unusualness of the current situation, Mueller locates Trump far, far outside the norm of presidential behavior. Well, we all knew that should be the conclusion. There isn't a need to fret over the precise line where good faith exercise of Article 2 authority blurs into corrupt intent, not only because Trump has so far overshot that line, but because other presidents, past and future, by and large, have been and will be of good enough faith, we hope, to stay well within the acceptable boundaries. Trump is not doing what presidents do. He is not acting like a president is bound by the Constitution to act. We'll get again to a specific example that will clarify the difference in just a second, but this makes me think of the broader arguments that we hypothesized about in earlier months of the show. Couldn't the president simply say, we're going to look from now on, we're going to take our foreign policy direction from Russia. For these purposes, we are entering into a political union, an overt political union with Russia. Vladimir Putin is my national security advisor. That's my prerogative as president of the United States. Is it? Most people would recoil at the idea, but, well, why wouldn't it be? I guess might be if you really just wanted to open up to all possibilities. Why couldn't the president seek his advice and counsel from anybody? And, by the way, shield it from inspection by executive privilege. As Armando was pointing out, the OLC had done as late as 2007, when Greg mentioned that it's possible that you couldn't shield with executive privilege the advice of outside counselors. Apparently the OLC feels differently about that, and I'm not sure they're wrong about that. I don't see why the president shouldn't be able to solicit a wide range of opinion. I mean, It becomes problematic only at the hypothetical extremes, like my national security advisor is Vladimir Putin. But legally speaking, what would be the recourse that we have about that? I'm not certain that there is any. I mean, it may be that somewhere in the U.S. code there's actual mention of the fact that your national security advisor should be a citizen of the United States. But is that actually required anywhere? Or is that just one of the assumptions that we have? No Senate would approve one that wasn't. Well, this Senate would do just about anything. No Senate would allow a criminal president to get away with the things he's doing. But this one does. All right, so a better direction here. We'll just continue on. Here's a good example of the kinds of things that people worry could be chilled if you, generally speaking, allowed for charging a president with obstruction of justice for exercising arguably legitimate Article 2 powers. How could that be, right? What would be close to the line? Well, here's an example. Compare this. Where do we leave off? I guess I probably have to read one more sentence here. Trump is not doing what presidents do. He's not acting like a president is bound by the Constitution to act. Ready? Compare this, Trump, I guess, and his activities, to another example of official action that could have been construed as obstruction. Ready for this one? But that nobody understood as such. Here we are. In 2010, so we're talking about Barack Obama. In 2010, the U.S. government arrested 10 Russian agents in what became known as Operation Ghost Stories. That name doesn't ring a bell, but 2010 and Russian agents does. Anna Chapman, right? So, shortly after these arrests, shortly afterward, then U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, there's the name you recognize, whose office was set to prosecute some of the cases, learned that the government was negotiating with the Kremlin for a spy swap. As the New York Times later reported, Bharara's office was plunged into debate over whether it was, quote, appropriate for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York to acquiesce to the deal, even before bringing an indictment. Bharara ultimately determined that the deal was acceptable and just, the Times wrote, and worked to obtain guilty pleas before the swap took place. But the Times also noted that the team debated what would happen if the office were asked to dismiss a prosecution for less noble reasons. President Obama had authorized the swap. Could this be considered obstruction under Mueller's framework? It was, after all, the use of Article 2 authority to influence an official proceeding by pushing Bharara's office to speedily obtain guilty pleas. But the question is obviously absurd. There is no serious argument that Obama was acting on the basis of anything other than, as Mueller puts it, a clear governmental purpose with no credible basis for suspecting a corrupt personal motive. Now, that, of course, would not have stopped people from suspecting a corrupt personal motive. Certainly the right-wing wackos, why wouldn't they simply accuse it? Now, especially in light of all the accusations about President Trump, why wouldn't they say, how do we know that Obama wasn't being paid by Putin? How do we know that he wasn't being bribed, that he wasn't getting some sort of deal out of these things? And ultimately, you can't be 100% sure, right? But here's the difference that, as Mueller describes it here. There's nothing that indicates that. There's just simply, you can make up the suspicion, and you could make up the same suspicion about Donald Trump. Absolutely. The problem with it being about Donald Trump is that there's so much actual solid evidence elsewhere that he does have and always did have that kind of relationship with Russia and the Russian government and Russian political actors, either directly or through a very coincidentally assembled team of intermediaries, all of whom had the same sort of weird contact going on. That's the problem, and that's the difference. Barack Obama didn't have that going on in 2010 or ever, and Donald Trump has always had that going on. In the early days of the Trump presidency, Benjamin Wittes and I, Quinta writes here, argued that the fundamental difference between Trump and normal presidents came down to the oath of office. Trump, we said, could not be trusted to uphold his, not the least because he had shown little or no ability to understand what it would mean to, quote, faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. While Mueller doesn't point to the oath of office, it's notable that Kent, Lieb, and Sugarman situate the take care clause alongside the oath as the twin commands of faithful execution, emphasizing the President's duty of fidelity to the law. Wittes and I understood the presidential oath as the essential animating factor behind the presumption of regularity. The idea that, as the Supreme Court wrote in 1827, every public officer is presumed to act in obedience to his duty until the contrary is shown. There's much more about this. To return to the ghost stories example, there was nothing about Obama's actions in that case that overcame the presumption of regularity. In part, I would argue, because both the public and other office holders, including Barrara, trusted Obama's oath of office. Mueller does not use the notion of the presumption of regularity, though he applies it to the actions of prosecutors, not the president. But the concept is a useful way of framing how Mueller's legal reasoning contextualizes Trump's actions. To locate Trump so far outside the norm and to argue that future presidents will likely not be hampered by the precedent set by Mueller's reasoning is also to insist in part on reestablishing the presumption of regularity for the office of the presidency more broadly.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
It's an interesting thing to start, and an interesting exercise to start contemplating. We're going to have to return to this one probably tomorrow, although I'm sure circumstances will interrupt it, because there's a major problem with the assumption Mueller makes about the rest of future presidents adhering to this standard. We'll be back with that and more tomorrow.